And hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Double Cross Radio. I'm coming to you live tonight from the secret above ground bunker here in Southern Oregon. And happy tonight to have all of you with me wherever you are in the world. And I happened to get a note from a friend of mine that lives in China that they're going to be listening tonight. So hello, China. Awesome. Before I get into tonight's topic, which is going to be the annihilation of the general theory as authored by John Maynard Keynes, I just wanted to give you guys a couple of updates on the stuff we talked on last week. We were talking about how unstable and precariously and the precarious system that our banking system finds itself. And today, Simon Black in his Sovereign Man column had a piece where he just basically confirmed everything that I told you. He did it in a much shorter span. It didn't take him an hour to get it all out. He printed out something that probably take you 3 or 4 minutes to read. But he basically said the same thing. He said, I'm going to quote from his article. I urge you guys to go and see this. It's at the Sovereign Man. It's the May 14th blog that he put out. It says, quote, banks inter themselves in the most expensive locations with ornate lobbies and cornerstones that proudly inform the world they are backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. But that barely counts, given that the United States government itself is insolvent with a negative equity of minus $17.7 trillion, according to their own financial statements. And then there's the FDIC, which insures the deposits in the U.S. banking system. In its 2014 annual report, the FDIC itself points out that the whole insurance fund constitutes just a fraction of a percent of all deposits in the system. That is, its reserve ratio is just 1.01% of all deposits. So don't be counting on the FDIC. I said you might be lucky to get, 7, 8, 9 cents back. I revised that. You'll probably be lucky to get 1 penny on the dollar back of anything that you have in a bank when the banking system collapses. So don't keep too much money in the bank. It's not the safest place anymore. It used to be a saying that said you could take this to the bank. Well, that doesn't mean what it used to be because the banking system isn't quite as safe as it was. So thanks to Simon Black for that awesome op-ed today, or blog, or whatever we call these things. It was a really good read. And, of course, he's always doing this as a way to try and get you to subscribe to his investment services. And I think from the information that he gives out for free, the stuff that he charges money for must be really something, because he's got a ton of information and it's really good stuff. And I hope that all of you guys, if you have a need for that kind of thing, would take advantage of a service like that. Or perhaps the Dollar Vigilante, Jeff Berwick. It's the same kind of service where they're actually looking for the things that the conventional investors aren't looking at. And they're giving you information that nobody else will tell you because they don't want to scare you off from the system. Where the people that are telling you the truth are telling some stuff that's pretty scary sometimes. But it's stuff you need to know if you're going to stay alive when stuff starts to go wrong. And it's going to happen. In the history of the world, no fiat currency has ever survived much longer than the fiat currency that we have here in the United States. And so don't be holding up all your hopes saying that America can't fail. It's too big to fail. That's not true. It's no such thing when it comes to that. I also came across another, I was doing some research today trying to get information on a topic I wanted to cover today. And this is not a direct banking thing, but it's related to that. At Mises.org, the May 12th article was published by Frank Shostak. The title of the editorial is the Keynesian multiplier a real thing? This is an excellent article. It's not an easy read. You have to have a little bit of economic knowledge, but if you just stop and read the sentence kind of out loud to yourself and think about what it means and go on to the next one, you'll be thankful at the end of it because you will know something you didn't know before. It is full of great information. It was part of that went into my show tonight, and I think that's a very informative. If you're kind of self-teaching yourself all about the world of economics, this is not a bad spot to start. Now, last week we were talking about how the money supply is expanded, how the banking system is kind of, they're called zombie banks for a reason. They really are not viable. They're teetering on bankruptcy or failure or insolvency, and the reason they are is because of the fractional reserve banking system is inherently flawed. It can't work. It's at some point in time, people are going to need the cash that's available in their bank, and it's not going to be there, and it causes a panic, and there's a run on the banks. It doesn't take more. I think it doesn't take more than maybe 1 out of 10 people to go there and suddenly want to withdraw their money, and the bank will be insolvent overnight. So it's just not a good situation. I would not keep a lot of money in your bank account. I wouldn't keep your life savings there. You need to have some there for the business that you have to do, pay your mortgage and your car payment and maybe your utility bill, maybe do a lot of online stuff. And so you can use the online banking for all that. You can pay your bills at home. You don't have to buy postage stamps all the time anymore and write checks out. It's a lot more convenient. I do a lot of mine that way. I certainly keep money in the bank for that purpose. But I keep a lot of my other assets in other places. I'm not going to disclose that now, but in case the feds ever come and raid my house, you don't need to cut open my mattresses. I don't hide it in my mattress. Okay, now, tonight's subject, a lot of the things that have happened in the banking industry right now are kind of based on the economics of a man named John Maynard Keynes. And Keynes was a very influential person. He was pretty smart guy. He's a real persuasive talker. He had a very strong wit. He often would win debates by mocking his opponents rather than by proving them wrong. And a lot of the people that defend him do the same thing. They just try and be incredulous that you would ever say something like this, that you must be a dull-witted nincompoop or whatever. But Keynes really advanced a lot of things in his theory, or there are a lot of consequences of his theory, his general theory, and a lot of the things that he advanced that just don't make any sense. They go against, they're kind of like denying gravity exists or something like that. And I have a perfect example of this. At the beginning of our current economic crisis back in 2008, they extended unemployment benefits. And there were people in the press that were questioning the leaders of the House and Senate as to how wise it was to extend unemployment benefits at a time when there wasn't any money going around. Now, where was the money going to come from? And Nancy Pelosi spoke up, and I'm not trying to say this to defend Nancy Pelosi, but she isn't an economist, and it shows. She even admits it. It would be kind of silly for her to claim that she'd had some economic knowledge, because every time she opens her mouth, it's apparent she doesn't. But her advisors, her key advisors, are Keynesian economists, and they shape her opinions on all sorts of federal spending matters and how to. It helps to frame her state of mind. That's why she votes the way she does, because she believes the stuff they're telling her. She has no knowledge of economics that would lead her to believe that any of this stuff is just horse manure, which it is. And this flawed Keynesian approach, it kind of gives shelter to to the ever-growing federal budgets. She and the rest of the legislatures on both sides of the aisle draw up and pass and make. And she also makes really stupid statements sometimes, like this one. This is a quote. Economists agree that unemployment benefits remain one of the best ways to grow the economy in a very immediate way. It immediately injects demand into our markets and increases employment. For every dollar spent on unemployment benefits, the economy grows by, according to one estimate, $1.52, by others, $2. So somewhere in that range, but much more than is spent on it. Now, if this is true, if what she's saying is the truth, if $1 invested in unemployment benefits for someone who is not producing anything grows the economy by $1.52, why is anybody working? Why don't we just give everybody unemployment benefits? We can grow the economy faster than it's growing now. This obviously isn't true. And the theory that it's based on couldn't possibly be true if this is the outcome that it predicts. And the theory that it's based on is the Keynes general theory. And the foundation for the general theory is something called the multiplier effect. And I got bad news for all you people out there that believe in the multiplier effect. Well, first of all, I'm going to remind you that there is no Santa Claus. There is no Easter Bunny. And there is no multiplier effect. Okay. I want you to just remember this earlier statement. It's just unbelievable that paying people for producing nothing is a benefit to anybody other than those receiving the benefits. That it could somehow benefit those who labor to produce something and end up paying the way for those who don't produce anything. I don't know where that benefit is. Society as a whole suffers because there are less goods and services being produced. There's less competition for that. Prices must rise. Because more of your money is being siphoned off to pay for those that produce nothing, you have less available to spend. That really hurts the economy. I would think that unemployment benefits are a negative impact on the economy, and it's probably the other way around, that for every dollar spent on unemployment, it hurts the economy. It returns a benefit of 20 cents, possibly. Maybe not even that much. So you're losing 80 cents of benefit. I would see that a much more reasonable, easier to believe statement. Now, the multiplier effect is the entire foundation for Keynes' general theory. Everything that he said is based on this. Without the multiplier effect, you just keep going back to the fact that how is this creating growth in the economy? And it doesn't. Because without the multiplier effect there to somehow magically grow the economy, there is no growth, and all the programs and this philosophical economic approach that's put forward in general theory just won't work. Now, it's also it's the misplaced policies of our government are basically all based upon this same thing. I mean, I think it was, I think it might even been Milton Friedman that said, we're all Keynesians now. There are a lot of people that you would think are total free market people that wouldn't put any stock into this, but it's just a fancy mathematical formula that's based on a false assumption, and so they get a false result. But because the math is correct, people think that it's true. But it's when you start out with a formula that doesn't describe accurately what you're trying to solve for, it's not going to give you the right answer in the end. And if you think, well, the math is correct, it must be the right answer, it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it's kind of what happened. And I'm not going to go into mathematics because I can hear some of you snoring already. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the multiplier effect and why it's impossible. Just using fancy calculus and an improper beginning to an equation with which to make their predictions, economists give politicians the cover they need to continue to advance policies that grow government programs. And these programs hand out benefits for nothing other than need of the recipient. So there's no possible way that these programs could serve any benefit other than to relieve the suffering of the the poorest among us. But it doesn't grow our economy. It doesn't help the people that have to pay for these programs. It only helps the people who are in need. And if we do it because we want to help the people in need, well, that's a different thing. But we shouldn't try and make ourselves feel good about it because we think we're growing the economy, because that is a flat-out lie. Now, I'm going to try and explain how this multiplier effect is supposed to work, and I'm going to try and keep it really simple so it doesn't I hope I don't oversimplify this. I'm not trying to the actual case that's made is uses some pretty complicated calculus, and I don't think even if I told you all that stuff, you guys would follow me on a radio program. If I had maybe a blackboard, I could I could maybe do a little better. And I'm many years removed from my calculus training. I think I could still do it though. But the point here is, we'll just make this a real simple example. The population of the United States is about 350 million. We're just going to round that off to 300 million people. Now, if everybody in the country increased their spending, their consumer spending by $1, according to Keynes, depending on the multiplier, it could theoretically have a $3 billion impact on our economy. And that's what he says the benefit is. According to him, each person let's say each person kept 10% of the $1 that they received in that first transaction and spent the remaining amount. And they may have spent that remaining amount in purchasing more goods to sell. They may have spent it in retiring debt, whatever. They spent the rest. And each succeeding recipient keeps 10% and spends the rest. So the first one, recipient of the first dollar, he keeps 10 cents and spends 90 cents on something else. The next one keeps 9 cents and spends 81 cents on something else. And the next one keeps 8 cents and spends, that'd be 72 cents or 73 cents. Anyway, this pattern continues to the end where there's no more money left. It would, according to Keynes, would produce a 10-time multiplier. And the level of savings actually, whether it's 10 cents or 20 cents or 5 cents, the level of savings actually determines the extent of the multiplier. So if you cut the savings in half and only save 5 cents instead of 10 cents, you'd end up with a 20-time multiplier. And if you saved more, if you saved 20 cents instead of 10 cents, you would have a 5-time multiplier. Now that's according to the general theory and some calculus, the calculus is correct, but the formulas from which it gets its answer are not correct. That's my point. They don't describe what's happening. And they're confusing circulation of money with wealth production. And it has nothing to do with that. Money, in this case, we call our money is actually currency. Currency does not represent wealth. It's just a medium of exchange. It's a way to value one product against another. It's a way to, assuming that the value of the money stays relatively constant, which it isn't right now. We talked about that also in the preceding programs. The value of the money gives us a way to compare like a product at store A with a product at store B. And it also gives us a way to compare the price of a product in January as opposed to May or whatever over time. If something goes on sale, the drop in the price it alerts us to the fact that we will be using less currency to purchase at this time. And this sounds like it's really simplistic, but that's all money is. It's just a measure and a medium of exchange. It can also help to store assets. And you can save it and spend it at a later time, but that's becoming a less and less profitable strategy because inflation is just around the corner, I think, and I don't think keeping all your money in a bank or stashing it in your mattress or burying it out in the backyard is definitely going to be a good way to prosper, because you might wake up the next day and your currency would maybe make good wallpaper, and that's about it. So the Keynesian multiplier isn't really describing what's really happening. At each transaction, there's an exchange of currency for goods or services that have been produced by someone. But without the production, there would be no goods to purchase, no matter how high the demand from consumers was. So, I mean, there's all these assumptions that are made in this general theory multiplier effect thing that just aren't true. If nobody wanted, for instance, if no one wanted a Federal Reserve note because they'd rather have a silver coin or just an ounce, a silver bar, an ounce of silver, or they'd rather trade it for some bullets or maybe for some moonshine or something like this, it wouldn't matter how many times. I mean, the Federal Reserve notes wouldn't circulate at all. Would that mean that the economy is sinking? No, people are still producing goods that other people want. And in order to get what they want, they have to produce something that somebody else wants. And that's kind of how an economy works. You have to produce something first before you can consume something. Keynes thought that the consumption was what drove the production, and it's the other way around. You can't consume if you haven't produced something first. And you have to produce something. You can produce something that no one wants, and it won't do you any good. It's a waste of your time and effort. But Keynes didn't think that's the problem. If there's a demand for something, even if it's being fueled by, if it's an artificial demand being fueled by government policies and the Federal Reserve lowering interest rates, as it happened in the housing crisis, then you end up with a lot of people building houses that no one wants because everybody had a house. Some people had two. So production is always the first step, and that's one of the assumptions that Keynes makes that's wrong. And not only that, Keynes, because he thought you could stimulate economy through, how to put this the best way. You could stimulate economy artificially by pumping money into the system, which would simulate the same effect as if people had been saving money. So instead of having people save money, you could just have the banks create money out of thin air and pump it into the system, and that would give the same kind of stimulus that savings would give. Now, that also isn't true. When people are saving money, what it does is it lowers their consumption first. And Keynes thinks that's bad, but I don't think it is. I think overall it generates more consumption totally, but for the short term, it can put a brake on some consumption. And if a lot of people will buy a car and they'll put as little down as possible, make high interest car payments on a car, and just drive it for a couple of years and trade it in and get another one, and they really are paying a lot of what they're paying as interest. They're not they'd be better off buying a car with cash, maybe a used car, and trading up and trading up and trading up till they got the car they wanted and never paying any interest. They'd get that car they wanted free and clear a lot faster than they'd ever get out of a car payment the other way. And that's kind of Keynes's theory, though. He says, well, people will keep doing that, and that will create more jobs, stimulate the economy, and keeps going that. But it really is not a fulfilling thing. The only people making any money in that system are the bankers. People are spending their hard-earned money on interest, which buys them only time. They get what they want faster, but they have to pay a much higher price for it over time. So Keynes thought that he could stimulate the economy by making credit easier, more money available. They're going to create money out of thin air, basically, and give it to banks or sell it to banks so they could loan it out and make money on the interest. This money, there is no production at all associated with this money. It's created by keystrokes on a keyboard at a computer at the banking central. So if this gets out of control, if they do this too much, then this debases the money too fast, and people realize that there's too much money chasing too few goods, and people start to bid up the price of all the consumer goods, and everything starts to go up in price. This is what happened in the Weimar Republic, happened more recently in Rhodesia, turned, what's it called now, Zimbabwe. And it seems that, I think it happened in the Serbian Peninsula, one of the countries in former Yugoslavia recently too. It's not that uncommon of occurrence. It happens, I would say in the last 100 years, it's happened to 4 or 5 different countries. And don't think it can't happen here, because you're about to see it happen here pretty soon, I think. Anyway, Keynes thought it was the stimulation, the demand that caused the economy to grow, because they were trying to meet the demand. Well, that's not entirely false, but he misses the point that demand, just wanting something, doesn't mean you're going to be able to buy it. I would like to own the Golden Gate Bridge, but I don't think I've got enough money. I just think that, that just the revenue from tolls and everything might be a good investment. So, I might want that, but there's no way on God's green earth I'm ever going to have enough money to buy it, even if it probably isn't that good of an investment. But I think I could raise the tolls on it to a higher amount, because what's your other alternatives to get from the other side of the bay to San Francisco? You got to take a ferry. That's pretty expensive, takes a long time, and it's or you got to go all the way around to the Bay Bridge, which is a long drive. Let me tell you, that may be longer than the ferry ride. So I think you could probably raise the fares there quite a bit, and still, there'd be a few people complaining, but I think you could make some money there. But I just don't. I'm going to have to get some other investors around me to buy that puppy, because I think it belongs to the state of California or something. And they probably don't going to give away. They probably want a dear price for it. But what I was trying to say there is that just because I want it, just because there's demand for it, doesn't mean I'm going to be able to buy it. The banks would have to print an awful lot of money in order to enable me to do that. I'm not producing enough stuff to even come close to, even a couple inches of that bridge. So demand in itself isn't everything that's out there. And sometimes if you're creating an artificial demand, it gives the wrong signals to the producers. Now, as I started to talk about this earlier, in the housing crash of 2008, the people that were building houses were getting all these wrong signals. They were getting these signals of lowered interest rates. What usually causes lower interest rates? What causes lower interest rates? If the banks have a lot of money on deposit in savings accounts and such. So that would mean that people, normally when rates go down, it's because people have a lot of money in the savings accounts. The banks are trying to loan it out and to make some money. So they lower the interest rates they pay on the savings, and they lower the rate on the loans that they're putting out at the same time. They still try to make about 2%, but that's kind of the that's the dynamic that's going on. And so when they see interest rates going down, they generally say that's a good time to start. Let's start some building projects. Let's start some housing projects. There's pent up demand out there. There's money in the bank ready for these houses we're going to build. But that wasn't the case. It's a fake stimulus. It isn't based on savings. It's based on just creating money out of thin air, like I said. And to top that off, there really was no production behind this. Obviously, there's no savings. And there's not adequate production in place for people to be able to afford these houses. A lot of people that got into these new houses that were built got into them through some kind of changing of lending standards and some qualifying people that weren't really able to afford the houses they were getting into, and they would qualify them by giving them balloon payments that they're never going to be able to make, and because they're not producing enough. So they're trying to ignore this facet of something has to be produced first before you can be a consumer. They tried to go around that. So what happened with these people? Well, they bought these houses. They had these brand new houses, and whammo, they had that balloon payment kicks in, and we can't make that. They're in foreclosure. This housing crisis not only wiped out a lot of house builders, it wiped out a lot of first-time house buyers. And it's all because it's a fake stimulus. It was giving everybody the wrong signals. As people were saying there's lots of money around, we'll just be swimming in money, house values never go down. Everybody was telling them all the wrong things. They were telling them things that weren't true. And they were basing all their decisions on these false assumptions that were, these are people that are professional investor analysis on TV and talking head shows saying houses never go down. Guess what? They were wrong. Housing prices went down. In Medford, where I live, they fell about 50%. My house was underwater for quite a while in terms of what I owed and what it was worth. But I like where I live, so I just, stuck it out. I also took that time to produce some things, and I accumulated a little capital and did some remodeling, and I enhanced the value that way by producing something, creating a walk-in closet in some earlier or heretofore dead space, and replaced an old worn-out carpet that I was going to have to replace anyway. I replaced it with a hardwood floor, and then I did some other things, and I increased the value of the home, but that was a minor thing, but it was something that I could do. But what I was doing is I was producing something. And I wanted to maybe someday sell my house. And I thought, if I'm going to do this, I can't count on the value going up until I'm out of the water again. I got to do things that increases the value of the house. So this helped to bring my house close to even Steven. And then there's a little bit of housing inflation going on here. People realizing that they could buy houses like mine and rent them out. And so there's increase in demand. And so I'm okay now again. But this was all due to Keynesian theory and a poor assumption that a multiplier effect is having people building houses is going to help the economy. Well, how does it help the economy? And all these people spent all that time and effort building the houses that had to be torn down or are still empty. How does that help your economy? All that wealth and energy and time, labor time, was put in projects that amounted to nothing. So, like I said, it's just another one of those things. There's the theory is wrong to start with, and they have some fancy mathematics to try and prove it, but they're starting with a flawed equation to begin with. It isn't describing adequately what the market process is. It's far too complicated to be described by a formula that can be solved with calculus. And the second thing that's wrong with this is savings. As I said before, savings really plays a real key role in the expansion of the economy. Now, savings, unlike this artificially created stimulus, savings is real wealth that's been built up over time. Instead of using currency, let's say we're just trading in commodities, and a guy has a tomato farm, or actually that was the example that Frank Shostak used in his example. I'll use a different one. Let's say a guy's a fisherman, and he catches more fish than he can eat every day. And so what he does with his excess fish, he smokes them and dries them and stores them up. And then when fishing season's over, a lot of people still are hungry for fish flavor. He sells his it's salmon. He sells his smoked salmon, and he can actually get more money for it that way than he can the other way. So he can save his wealth in one area and then convert it over to currency if he wants to, or he could just keep it stores for quite a while as smoked product. It doesn't deteriorate. And so he can save it up until he has enough money to do something that he wanted to do. Because he's not working on it while it's just sitting there smoked. It's been in storage, basically. It's been canned, or it's somehow in a vacuum sealed pouch or something. It's going to be there and ready to sell when someone wants to buy it. So he can do other things. And this stored wealth that he has now is available for him. If he's able to sell it all, he maybe have enough money to go out and purchase a car that he wanted to purchase. Well, that's how real savings works. Now, let's say he converted it all to currency and he did put it in a bank and he wasn't sure what he's going to do with it. But there's somebody else that needs that money to do a project they want to do. Well, the bank will pay him so much interest and charge the other guy maybe 2% more than what they're paying the fisherman, and that money now is in part of a pool of savings that's being used by the bank to help finance somebody else who's producing something that's good for the economy. That's how savings helps the economy grow, and it's real money. The money that's at risk is real money. If the bank makes a risky loan, the fisherman's going to be kind of pissed off when he can't get his money back out of the bank. So they have to be very careful and cautious about who they loan money to, and they have to have collateral for it so they could take whatever portion that they need and deal with that. And so savings is something that really helps an economy grow in a real way. It isn't something that has a boom bust part of it. The savings part of it it's important, and it's important for long-term projects. It's important for short-term purchases. I encourage anybody out there that's tending to make a fairly large purchase, try and save up as much money as you can before you make the purchase. The less interest you buy, the better off you're going to be. It's really sickening to me to see people that really can't afford it making these huge payments on something, and it's taking food off the table for their family, or it's they don't buy the new shoes for the kids, or they what else they go without to pay interest. So Keynes was wrong on that. The savings is actually a good thing. He says it was bad. He says it was a break. It says savings put a brake on the economy. It's slowing it down. It's like running a train with the brakes on. Well, that's not true. Savings actually is a necessary part of making long-term investments. And because of the nature of savings, we tend to make better choices on our long-term investments. In other words, the banks know that if they're going to stay in business, they have to be careful who they loan the money to. The long-term investment has to have a reasonable chance of success. And if it doesn't, they're in trouble. So, on the other hand, the stimulus money comes down the pike. It comes floating into the bank, and they can loan it out to somebody. And if that one goes belly up, well, if they're too big to fail, then they maybe get bailed out and they can try it again. They can continue to gamble with that money. It isn't really an asset to them. They're not going to have a depositor come screaming at them, "I want my money back," because it's coming from another source. It's being created out of thin air, literally. And those loans, especially with changes in laws that actually forced the banks to loan money to people who maybe couldn't afford them, they kind of compounded the problem in the housing industry and created a kind of a perfect economic storm. And it was truly a failure of Keynesian economics. And the Austrian economics, the school of economic thinking that I subscribe to, and I'm by no means a professional economist, I'm an amateur totally, but the Austrian school predicted this. They said this is going to happen. We're going to have malinvestment because this isn't true savings. It's stimulus money. It doesn't come, there's no skin in the game. It's going to put producers producing things that people don't need, and there's going to be overproduction in these areas, and it's going to have to be liquidation, and a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. And they did. All those things happened. In a totally free marketplace, demand increases are signals to the producers, and it's signaled to them through reduced inventories on store shelves and sometimes on higher prices being paid by consumers. These signals cause producers to bid for more raw materials to make or grow whatever it is they produce. In this way, raw materials that can be used in many different production processes. I'll give an example here of cow's milk. You can use it in ice cream, you can use it in yogurt, you can use it in a lot of manufactured foods, processed foods. It can go into sauces, it can go to restaurants, it can go to a lot of places. But when the people that are, let's say you're an ice cream maker and you see demand start to rise, the supplies are getting low on the shelves and you're having bigger and bigger orders. Well, you're going to start bidding more and more of your resources to get more milk because you have to make more ice cream while this demand is there. And the prices might go up a little bit in the stores, which enables you to bid for more milk and create more ice cream. Who knows? But that's a signal that's given to the producer that he needs to get more stuff and he needs to make more stuff because prices are going up and inventories are going down. So when you get those kinds of signals, then you react in that way. It's just common sense. But when you get prices going up and they're going up because the money is being debased and you start to produce more, it doesn't necessarily mean that the inventories are going down, that there's less on the shelf. It might be less on the shelf because the stores are ordering less because they have higher expenses because of inflation starting up. So this money debasement, it distorts the signals that come from the free market to the producers and the consumers, and it distorts how they measure the value of anything. Now, under the Keynesian system, assuming that demand begins the process and thus stimulation can be accomplished through printing more money, the producer can often be fooled into producing more of something than there is actual demand for. Well, we've already talked about that, about the housing crisis, and this has happened many, many times. All the stock market bubbles the present stock market is way overvalued. Why? Because there was money and no place to put it because all this stimulus money had been created. So people bought stocks, and the stocks made the stock market go up. It's kind of a ride up to the top, but there's really nothing supporting all that. There's no real profits or production supporting it. It's just stimulus money created out of thin air. It isn't based on profits from things being produced. And suddenly what seemed like maybe a low-risk procedure, a can't-lose type of thing, turned into a toxic asset for the banks in the housing crisis. Well, I think the stock market's a lot of those stocks are going to become kind of toxic portions of your 401ks, and a lot of people are depending on those when they retire to live on, and the value of those might suddenly lose a lot of the value that's there, and the dividends that used to come out might stop, so there's a real consequence to this debasement of the money supply. And I just would hope that all of you people are aware of this and have kind of learned something from my rambling tonight. There's really no good reason for the central banks to be creating more money to stimulate the economy when it's gone into a recession or depression. And it doesn't do anything but postpone the day of reckoning and make that day much more painful. I don't know if I can think of a good analogy, but I remember how much I hated to have a Band-Aid taken off when I was a kid. It just kind of pulled all the hair on if you had one on your arm, you had a scrape or something, and when you started to take it off, it'd pull the hair out on your arm. It just kind of didn't feel very comfortable. But if you left that Band-Aid there, the scab would kind of form into the Band-Aid. So when you ripped it off, it would pull off the scab too, and that would really hurt. The longer you left it on, the worse it would be. Unless you left it on long enough for the scab to heal underneath it, but it usually didn't because it was too moist and never dried out properly. So postponing something isn't going to make it go away. The problems that existed in 2007, 2008, actually further back before that existed in the end of the 20th century, they were still there, and they were just funneled into a different part of the economy, the housing sector, which made people think they'd gone away, but they weren't. They're still there. And the housing sector failed, and now they're funneled back into the stock market, which made people think the housing problem went away. It didn't go away. It's still there. And trust me, the stock market is going to fail again. It'll be a different sector that leads it down. It might be a banking sector that leads it down. As we discussed earlier, the banks are now in a situation where they hold all these, I call them toxic government assets, the treasury bills, treasury bonds. The bonds, if interest rates go up, the bonds become worthless. And that means that the banks have to find some other reserve for all the, for the deposits that they have on their books. They have to have at least a certain amount of liquid reserves that they could use to pay off depositors should they want their money. And I used that example last week of a guy came in and wanted a modest withdrawal. I mean, I think they were going to buy a piece of equipment. They're a construction company, and they wanted $4,000 because the guy wanted cash. He didn't want a check. And I could understand that. You don't know if a check's going to clear or whatever. You don't want to go to the bank with the guy or all that. But they didn't have $4,000 in the bank. I was thinking, what the hell is going on here? I mean, any bank that doesn't have $4,000 in cash in it isn't in very good shape. And I'm not going to tell the name of the bank. I don't want to get sued by anybody, but I mean, it was a branch office, to be fair to them. It wasn't their main office, but still, they don't have a lot of cash. Trust me, they don't. A lot of it's been loaned out to other people. A lot of them are zombie banks. And it's just you just have to take my word on this one. So this was tonight's show was supposed to be kind of some further evidence on why we shouldn't have any trust and faith in our present economy. It's based on a flawed economic theory, general theory, but John Maynard Keynes. It's never worked. It's never produced the results it promised. Never, ever. It gives, I shouldn't say never, ever. In the short term, it sometimes makes it look like it's giving the desired effect, but it never comes out with the effect it's supposed to. Remember when they first started to extend the unemployment benefits and they did the stimulus package and they say this is going to bring the unemployment rate down to 8%. What happened? Unemployment went up. They're always wrong on their economic predictions because it isn't a viable theory. It's based on flawed assumptions. It doesn't have an adequate formula to assess what's going on, and it can't be solved with calculus. Well, it can be solved with calculus, but it gives you the wrong answer because it starts out in the wrong spot. So, all of you repeat after me. I will not keep all my money in the bank. I will only keep enough there to handle my monthly expenses. I will put some of my assets into other forms like gold or silver, maybe Bitcoin if you want to take some risks. I will not tell my friends of my purchases I'll try and pay cash for all these things so they'll be as anonymous as possible and no one knows of what I have. And I'll try and find secure locations to store these assets so they'll be available to me should I need them and nobody else will know where they are. Now, if you're going to go out and put it in a tin can and bury it in your backyard, you better make a map or something so you remember where to dig. I'm just saying. There are other things you can do. You could rent a safe deposit at a bank. Probably not a good idea. When the banks closed in Cyprus, they raided all the safe deposit boxes. They cleaned them out. True story. Well, I don't think they have a very big business in safe deposit boxes in the banks in Cyprus anymore due to that. But that's what happens, People will forget about that in another 10 or 15 years. They'll be able to rent those safe deposit boxes out again. Just how it goes. Remember, it can happen here. It has happened here. They had a banking holiday during the Great Depression, and a lot of the banks didn't ever open up. I was talking with my customers at the store last week, and she was living in Hawaii at the time, and she was saving up money to buy a car, and the bank she had the money in was closed, and it took her over 10 years to get her money back. 10 years. It was paid out by FDIC. And that was when there was only a few bank closures a year, and it took her 10 years to get her money back. Now the FDIC has enough to pay 1 penny on a dollar on all the bank deposits that are out there. 1 penny on a dollar. By their own admission, at their own statistics. And what are you going to do with your penny? What are you going to buy? I mean, let's say you had $100,000 in the bank. It suddenly became $1,000. Well, $100,000, you could live on that for a few years, depending on how much debt you had. And if you didn't have any debt, you could probably live on it for maybe 4 or 5 years if you're, kind of lived meagerly. $1,000, I bet you couldn't even live a month. And that's just how it is. So you don't want to have what you're going to need to depend on to live in the near future tied up in a place where you may not have access to it. And when you do, you may not get more than a few cents on the dollar. I said last week, maybe up to 9 cents. And when I read that story by Simon Black, he had better statistics than I had. I realized I was off by 8 or 9 cents. It's going to be 1 cent or less on the dollar. So that's just summing up. We're showing you what's wrong with the economy. We're showing you why it's faltering. We're showing you why it's going into these recessions. It's actually a depression. They use fake numbers on their fake economic numbers to say we've come out of the recession, and then it goes back into the recession, so they can just say it isn't a depression, but it's a depression. If you really believe that unemployment's 5%, I just purchased this Golden Gate Bridge down there in San Francisco. I think I can turn around and flip it and sell it to you right now. It's making me money, and that's more than I need. So I'm willing to just get rid of it, take my profits, and go. Maybe get a sailboat and sail around the Caribbean for a while. I don't know. So if you believe that unemployment's 5%, I think that this is a bridge for you. I still have a few minutes left. I think maybe I'll close with a couple more of those stories, or maybe at least one more. The stories of people that had all their money taken out of their bank account because the drug agency accused them of structuring their deposits to avoid having to make reports by their bank. Well, that just seems to me to be kind of weird. I mean, there's a lot of businesses that don't have the time to go to the bank every day, so they might save up deposits for a week and go in on Friday. Maybe go in. Maybe there's, some of them close at 5 o'clock every day, and they could go in between 5 and 6 o'clock here and make a deposit when they're closed. They're not missing any business then, if they're just a kind of a one-man show there. There's other people that might use a night drop or something, but they're not sure if they're going to need change the next day or something. So they might keep some money around, and they just don't want to keep it over a weekend, or they're going to be closed on Monday. They don't want to keep it, locked up in their store Sunday and Monday. So they put it in the night drop on Saturday, and they put in maybe $6,000. That's what they made that week. That was their profit. Well, maybe, they see this pattern of making deposits on Saturday night drops, where it's recorded on Monday morning, and it's $6,000, $5,000, $7,000, $8,000, $6,000. And they think, they're consistently depositing under $10,000. They're structuring their deposits so they don't have to report it. Well, they're looking for an excuse to go and steal their money. And a lot of times these people don't ever get their money back. Ever. And we told you about the guy in North Carolina that lost $107,000. There's a lady in Missouri, I believe it was, had a small, maybe it was Oklahoma, I don't know, somewhere in that region. And she had a small restaurant, and she had her whole life was in that bank account. And she lost about $35,000, and she has no money. She would use that money. She had one or two waitresses that worked in her restaurant. She had no money to pay payroll. She had to keep buying food with the takes every day. She had very little profit. Some days she'd have enough to pay them, but she also had withholding taxes to pay, and she used that bank account to cover those things so she could legally operate her business. She's trying to play by the rules, and they just came and took it. Effectively put her out of business. Another reason not to keep all your money in the bank. The banks roll over and play dead when the government shows up at their door. The Patriot Act, the RICO laws, they make it very easy for for the government to go out and pick on small prey like that. People that don't really have the wherewithal to fight them in court, because it's going to cost them more than they're taking. Now, if they go out and they try and go against HSBC, who's a money laundering factory, that's a big bank. It's a foreign bank that launders literally trillions of dollars in drug money every year. Well, they can't get that money because those people have the money to hire lawyers and legal teams that will cause a lot of problems for the agency. So and they go after the people that are kind of defenseless. And they're predators, those people at the government are. So if you're a small-time operator, if you're self-employed, if you're whatever, you had to find someplace else to keep your profits. You might keep your operating money that you need to operate your business in the bank, but you keep the rest of your money somewhere else. Oops, I hear the music. The time is up. Thank you for listening, everybody. I will see you next week. Have a good weekend, and we'll be with you next Thursday.
You're bound to break.